Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to bring you the patch 9.1 Discipline Priest Guide, going over a lot of the big changes from the 9.1, as well as just starting to talk about what Discipline's going to look like for the new raid, Sanctum of Domination. Alright, starting off, if you're new to Discipline and everything like that, or if you're very experienced, be sure to check out the timestamps below or on the video player, as, you know, some of you who are more familiar might want to start looking towards the end of the guides, and some of you who are more fresh, start here. All right. First and foremost, Discipline is the raid's burst-oriented healer and mass shielder. All right. That means that you're going to be putting up lots and lots of shields and absorbs before damage starts coming out, and your whole goal is to absorb damage and rest, and then absorb damage and then rest. Right. Your healing, your shielding is going to be very spiky. When it comes to a healing breakdown, unlike other healers, you're not going to be healing and pumping out healing 24/7, okay? Now, when it comes to setup, let's start talking about it, all right? Covenants have changed quite a bit for Discipline. With the Spirit Shell change to now be a 90-second cooldown, you're no longer going to be able to have that sweet, easy, mind games, mind bender, Spirit Shell ramp every single time. And instead, you're going to be altering your Covenant selection. If you still wanted to run Venthyr, you'd basically just be pouring tons and tons of mana to be able to make the spec continue to work in 9.1. And there's not always encounters where you could be using Mind Games on cooldown, so there's a lot of potential for wasted casts and unused casts of Mind Games to not get the same value as before. Which brings us to Kyrian. Of course, the Kyrian spec has been really strong for every 3 minutes, but with the new Covenant Legendary, of course, Sphere's Harmony, as well as the Effusive Anima Accelerator from Braun, you have a number of different avenues to be able to reduce Boon's cooldown to more closely align with the Spirit Shell CD. So for that scenario, right, the Effusive Anima Accelerator for Braun will reduce the cooldown of the Boon of the Ascended by 12 seconds per enemy hit. I know the tooltip on Wowhead's a little bit weird, but if you click the Priest selection on it, it'll show 12 seconds per hit, up to a minute. And Sphere's Harmony also can reduce the cooldown by a minute, but you also have to give up on Clarity of Mind, our usual mainstay legendary in the process. We'll talk about that more in the legendaries in a little bit as well. With this, though, is you have the flexibility through your Soulbinds and legendaries to be able to alter the cooldown of Boon of the Ascended to meet up with Spirit Shell for fight timers. Sometimes it's going to be very easy to do. You know, in M+, for example, you can basically just have a 1-minute Boon cooldown, which is amazing. But in other situations, you might have, for example, single target boss fights like Guardian of the First Ones, where you're not going to be able to have Boon up with every Spirit Shell, and that's okay, because Boon produces such large amounts of absorption effects from its Ascended blasts, and then using Novas to be able to increase the damage done by your Ascended eruption. So what in effect happens is you are capping your shields, having them get absorbed by some damage, and then exploding with your eruption to replenish those shields to back to that cap, so that they can then continue to yield more value. And that works really well on pretty much every encounter in Sanctum of Domination, because it's not just one burst and then there's nothing. It is multiple back-to-back-to-back bursts. It's pulsing damage. It's a huge burst with a dot follow-up. There's always going to be some follow-through to this damage, which will allow you to cap your shields, which of course is 11 times your spell power, if I remember correctly, and then be able to cap them again with the Ascended Eruption. In an ideal scenario, you want to be in melee, and pretty much every single fight you can make this work. A couple of them might have a couple challenges, but almost always you're going to be able to be in melee to be able to explode with that Ascended Eruption and be able to put out a ton of healing in the process, which, of course, produces fantastic results. Now, since we're going to be running the Kyrian, of course, we're going to start talking about Soulbinds and Conduits here. Like I mentioned, the Effusive Anima Accelerator for Mykonos is extremely good if you're going to be able, of course, to be able to hit the requisite number of targets to get the cooldown low enough. some single target boss fights, like I mentioned with Guardian of the First Ones, you're probably not going to benefit too much from that. But Mykonos still has some excellent defensive value, either from some of the older traits, for example, like automatically activating your vial whenever you drop low, or from the new traits, from the new Soulbinds, where if you take physical or magic damage, you put up a shield. And you could take physical and magic damage, and you put up 2 shields from it as well. So you get a lot of extra defensive value from Mykonos' bind. But if you're not going to take advantage of the cooldown reduction and survivability is not as much of a problem, then Pelagos is also going to be a great option, as getting that mastery increase while you're utilizing Boon of the Ascended is just generally great, because mastery is going to be one of our better stats for producing the largest shells possible. So there you go. You're going to have great options with both of them. Keep in mind, while you're filling out that Soulbind tree, the process is basically you fill them out, and then you start empowering the conduits that you're going to have along the tree as well. So you'll go like all the way down the line, everything's unlocked, and then you go back down the line and start empowering and making your conduits kind of level up an extra level on their own. So the priority, you want to make sure you're getting Courageous Ascension, Exaltation, Rabid Shadows for your 3 potency conduits in that order as well, because they are all very strong, and your conduits are actually pretty legit, because every single one of them is doing something to make sure that your spirit shell is going to be stronger, very strong, right? So keep in mind, whether you're Pelagos or Mykonos, that's probably the priority that you're going to follow as you're going through your Soulbinds and Conduits. Now, previously when we were talking about Covenants, I was mentioning how you can't really align Mindbender with Spirit Shell's cooldown anymore. You got a minute CD on Mindbender, minute and a half cooldown on Spirit Shell. If you were to hold it, then you lose out on a really significant amount of mana, which again just makes you even more tied to having Boomkins and to be able to continuously feed you mana constantly, right? So instead, you're likely just going to be going after Solace, and if you take a quick look at our talent tree here, Schism, Feather, Sins the Many, Purge the Wicked, Spirit Shell, all the mainstays really. You could choose whatever you like in the 35 tier, depending on the situation. But the 30 tier, pretty much you're just going to be rolling with Solace, as it's going to be able to produce some pretty good throughput from any of the mini ramps that you're going to be doing in between your Spirit Shells. And of course, the significant mana return is going to make you more easily able to spot heal when you need to on progress. For example, during Castle Nathria, when I was playing Venthyr and everything, there were so many fights where I felt like I just had like barely any extra mana to be able to cast some Shadow Men to help out somebody who drops low, to the point that I was just, you're just hungering for mana on these early prog by such a large margin. When you're running with Solace, you have a little bit more flexibility to help out the team when you need to. But generally, like I said, a lot of your mana, a lot of your expenditure is going to be on those burst windows, and you don't want to be spending too much mana outside of them at all, right? Purge the Wicked's also going to be playing a very critical role as we start talking about some of the advanced rotational stuff coming up in just a second, because there's a pandemic effect with damage over time, right? Basically, back in the day, if you have a 20-second dot, you need to refresh it at 19.999 seconds or whatever before it expires, right? So you just keep on having the dots rolling. You don't want to refresh it 2 or 3 seconds early, because you would lose the effect of those 2 or 3 seconds. And for a couple expansions now, they've had this pandemic effect where if you refreshed early, you would have that 2 or 3 remaining seconds added on to the 20 that you would reapply. So what you can do with Purge the Wicked is you can actually back-to-back purge, and then the cast duration goes up to 26, 27 seconds. And that way you're going to have a much longer duration as you're beginning your ramp. Now let's start talking about what your ramp is really going to be looking like. I mentioned before how there's going to be ramps dedicated to 1 minute Boon of the Ascended. There's going to be some that might be around a minute and a half with Sphere's Harmony and the Mykonos Soulbind. And then there might just be some where it's not really going to be worthwhile to drop Clarity of Mind, or you don't have Mykonos unlocked, or you're fighting a single enemy, so Mykonos' value is really not that high, something along those lines. So you're just going to run a 3-minute Boon of the Ascended with Spirit Shell, and then the next minute and a half, you have to find something else that you're going to be able to work with it, and then you're going to work with Shadow Fiend. So let's start talking as well about those two main ramps that you're going to be looking at, especially as you go into early Sanctum of Domination, where you don't really have all these extra resources at your disposal. I also wanted to give a good shout out as well to the Theory Crafters at Focused Will. If you guys haven't heard, they have been doing a ton of the work to be able to bring, you know, Kyrian Discipline Priest into the light for everybody. For me personally, and as a lot of the footage you'll see, I was focusing really heavily on Venthyr throughout our testing, and they were the ones who were saying, hey, Kyrian's really, really good. So huge shout out to Reglitch and Smallpriest and all the guys at Focus Will for putting this work in to be able to bring this guide to you. As this Boon Shell ramp that I want to show right here for you is one of many different sequences, of course, and I'll leave links in the description below. There's one of many different possible ramp sequences, but this looks to be one of the more general and straightforward ramps that you can apply in a number of scenarios, okay? Some of the other ramps are going to be a little bit more niche where, okay, this fight, you know, will be really good for 1 minute boons. You'll change it up a little bit. And they have a really excellent tool, which is this ramp simulator where you can basically just plug in the different spells and the different ramp that you're going to be going for. And then you're going to be able to see the potential shielding and the potential overall output that you could make with it as well. So starting off, let's look at that primary Boon Shell ramp. What you're going to be doing here, and the whole goal, is to apply a lot of your atonements in advance of your radiances. And the idea is you're still going to have that clarity of mind extension, but you don't really need to have the radiances to be fully extended themselves, because a lot of times you just need them to get to the point where you have atonements up as your Ascended Eruption goes off to replenish those shields like I mentioned previously. So you started off with double Purge the Wicked, and like I mentioned before, that's to be able to get the Pandemic effect, to get that 26-27 second duration Purge the Wicked. You then cast a Shadow Mend, so this would be the first atonement that you would apply. And since Shadow Mend applies atonement at the end of the global cooldown, so you can Shadow Mend into instantly a shield, and they're applied, you know, within a fraction of a second of each other. You Shadow Mend once into the shield, and the amount of shields can kind of vary depending on how much haste that you have. Right here it has listed as 9 shields, but if you're a little bit lower in haste, you could run around 7 or 8. Into Radiance, and then you activate Boon of the Ascended, and you have to be really quick on this one. Once you activate that Boon of the Ascended, your smite turns into the Ascended Blast, so you need to first hit Spirit Shell, which is off the global cooldown, and then instantly hit Ascended Blast. I was messing around with a macro to make sure that I cast those both together, but sometimes it was activating Nova, so I might need to check in on that and get back to you guys on that one. But you Boon of the Ascended, Spirit Shell, Ascended Blast, you Radiance, to get your second Radiance off, which will also create Spirit Shell shields. Then you Ascended Blast again, because again, the whole idea is you never want to miss an Ascended Blast. You Schism, and again, if you have high enough haste, you should be able to get a quick Nova off. If your haste isn't as high, then you can just immediately blast into double Nova, blast, double Nova, blast, and then you should be able to get your Solace off as the explosion from Ascended Eruption goes off. So the idea behind this is you want to be able to get 19, 20 atonements out, be able to have Spirit Shell rolling, be able to use Ascended Blast on cooldown to be able to build up as many stacks as possible, and even if it's a single boss, and you're not hitting multiple enemies with the Nova to generate multiple stacks, you still want to bolster and beef up your Ascended Eruption, because we have that Courageous Ascension trait from the Conduit, like we mentioned before, because you want to be able to have those Ascended Blasts, build up your shields, soak up some damage, and then the Ascended Eruption replenishes those shields to do even more throughput. When it comes to both Ascended Nova and Ascended Eruption, the damage that they convert into atonement healing, which also becomes shielding, is only going to be converted off of the first target hit. So it's really important for the Ascended Eruption specifically to ideally hit one enemy, right? The Ascended Nova range is like 6 yards, so you have to be really close to the boss, but you have like double that. I think it's actually 15 yards for the Ascended Eruption, so you have a bit more space as well to be able to work with. So what I have done on a couple of fights that we messed around with on Nathria, and just looking back at some of our footage from Sanctum, you'd probably be really close into the boss, on a number of different encounters to be able to make sure you're getting the Novas built up and the stacks built up. And then you kind of move yourself out a little bit if possible to be able to ensure that you're only going to be hitting that one boss. Positioning is going to be very, very important because if you do it correctly, you can just really heavily replenish all of your shields. But timing of the eruption as well can kind of have a double value for something like Guardian of the First Ones or Soul Render Dormazane, where you're breaking chains or you're having constant pulses going off. So the Ascended Eruption can also just do its natural healing effect and then also be replenishing people's shields at the same time. So would it be fine if you're having people take, let's say everybody's topped off and you're building some shields at the beginning, if they start taking some damage, and then before the largest burst of damage or the largest era of damage, you're having the Ascended Eruption explode, heal everybody, and build up great shields in the process. It's kind of a perfect scenario that you'd be looking at, but in the end, if you're able to get your Ascended Eruption rolling and going to be making the maximum shields possible, you're going to be in great shape. You're going to be doing tons and tons of healing in the process there. Now, like I mentioned before, you're not always going to be able to have Boon of the Ascended on hand, which means for some of these more single target oriented boss fights, you're going to go and cycle between a big ramp and a small ramp. So you have that Boon ramp that we just mentioned, and now let's start talking about that sort of secondary ramp as well. You'd be holding on to Shadow Fiend for that extra minute and a half to make sure that you would have it up for the second Spirit Shell, in which case you'd also double Purge the Wicked, so you have Purge the Wicked rolling for the duration of this. Again, using that Shadow Mend into Power Word Shield trick. Make sure that you're maximizing your atonements. Once you're applying all those shields, you first Shadow Fiend, then double Radiance, then extend them with Spirit Shell. So again, Clarity of Mind still going to be played with this into your usual damage rotation of Schism, Penance, Solace, Mind Blast, and all the smites in the world. The reason why you wouldn't be using those class-based abilities like Penance, Solace, and Mind Blast during a Boon ramp is because, one, they don't really deal a crazy amount of damage, and two, the idea is you want to build up the most large Ascended Eruption as possible, and even though they're just a couple of quick Nova casts, they do make a pretty significant difference in getting the maximum damage output that you can for that eruption. The Shadow Fiend ramp isn't going to be, like I mentioned, as large or as crazy, but you're still tacking on some pretty large shields onto your party. I think on PTR, when I was messing around with it, I was getting around 20k shields onto everybody at least, often a little bit more as well. And with that, you're still going to be able to get enough extra shielding, still 40-50% of people's health pools improved. But that might also be a good time to say, hey, if we have a weak ramp, let's make sure that we have a Devo, a barrier, something extra to mix with this slightly weaker ramp. And then we don't really need to worry too much whenever you have your strong Boon ramp, because you're more than coating everybody's max health in shields, right? Something to keep in mind when planning different healer cooldowns as well. A couple of different advanced tips and things you want to be watching for. Usually on progress, you want to make sure you're giving your power infusion to somebody else. If you have the opportunity to be able to use it for yourself, I was messing around generally with using power infusion in the middle of my shield application so that I could make sure that I was getting more stacks of Ascended Novas and to be able to put out the maximum eruption possible. That was something I was messing around with, but as long as you're in like the high 20s, low 30s or something like that in haste, you're usually able to pull off a full 20 atonement ramp that's going to be at your disposal. When it comes to different trinkets that you can utilize to be able to make these shields go even larger, even though it did receive the nerf with like double on use trinkets, the Imperial Ordnance from Spires of Ascension can be really good. You want to be able to apply that while you're applying your shields so that you can have it kind of come back to you as you're putting out your Ascended Blasts. So that's a really good one to make your Boon ramp even crazy stronger. You generally won't worry too much about running with a PvP trinket, the 1 minute int anymore. Even though intellect is still really good for increasing your shields, you're holding on to it for quite a while. If there's a situation for a 1 minute boon, then that's another story, of course, where it would be quite nice. But generally speaking, I wouldn't really worry about that. I think the primary ones that you can farm right now or when the patch hits would be Soul Letting Ruby and Imperial Ordnance, depending on if you're going to have a fight like Soulrender Dormazane, Kel'Thuzad, Painsmith Raznal. Those are a couple of different fights that have around 2-minute timers between their large bursts that we saw in PTR. Of course, some things can change, but those are some of the encounters where you might go with Sphere's Harmony. Maybe cut down on a couple of atonements and not have that extra extension at your disposal, and instead just go for 2-minute bursts with Sphere's Harmony at your disposal. Something like Kel'Thuzad might be an encounter where you could run with Boon, Mykonos, and Clarity of Mind, because there's these glacial spikes that spawn throughout the encounter, and if you're going to hit them with the Boon activation, then you wouldn't have to worry as much about getting Sphere's Harmony to make sure you guarantee that sort of 2-minute Boon of the Ascended cooldown to align with the damage. And of course, you hold Spirit Shell for a little while, but it's okay holding Spirit Shell because you're trying to make sure it's there for the biggest damage possible, right? Otherwise, some of the biggest things are just going to be positioning on these encounters. I am going to be switching to Goblin as well for progression. Sanctum of Domination has just a crazy amount of fights with high movement requirements. You're going to have something like Eye of the Jailer really early on, where you need to be able to swing across the room. You're going to have fights like Remnant of Ner'zhul, which are going to try to knock you off the edge. Something like Painsmith Raznal, where he's going to have just this line of spiked balls that you have to be able to jump around, and you can actually jump off the platform and Goblin jump back on to skip around them. So there's a number of different things that you can do to be able to guarantee that you can have optimal positioning, and you can be a bit more greedy, and Goblin would be really strong for that. Otherwise, we're going to start working on a number of different ramp timers for these fights to be able to make sure that we're going to be covering sort of all our bases from some of the PTR testing that we've been doing, and make sure we just kind of have the best coverage possible. Once again, huge thank you again to Focus Will, Reglitch, Smallpriest for all the work and Theorycraft they've been putting into this. I'm going to leave some links in the description below for the different cast sequences that they've been working on. As well, and of course the ramp simulator tool if you want to mess around with it or import some of the profiles that they've made to be able to see how these ramps are going to start working out. And otherwise, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to leave them down in the description below. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you all found it helpful. And if you haven't checked it out already, we're going to be updating our Wowhead guides with quite a number of updates covering fight timers, as well as some tips for the new seasonal affix as well. So be sure to check in on that. And we're going to have a couple more videos coming your way for some preliminary ramp timers based off some of our testing. Those should be out before Heroic Sanctum of Domination launches. All right. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time. Hey guys, Booning Bernardson coming back at you with an updated disc guide for 9.1. Coming off the previous Spirit Shell nerfs, many people are concerned about the viability of Discipline in the next patch. Fortunately, I have since ascended into the ranks of the Kyrian and developed the ability to fuel myself purely through self-discipline and adherence to the rites of devotion. I have not eaten in several months, yet I exude energy to control small woodland animals with my thoughts alone. In conclusion, in 9.1, Disc is looking to be very strong with that Kyrian option there for players who love seeing juiced shells or looking into the fabrics of reality.